First, though, we want to also ask you about the alt-right. In a recent speech, Hillary Clinton basically referred to you and other people, didn't name you directly, but she quoted the Wall Street Journal. She said, alt-right is short for alternative right. The Wall Street Journal describes it as a loose but organized movement, mostly online, that, quote, rejects mainstream conservatism, promotes nationalism, and views on immigration and multiculturalism as threats to white identity. The de facto merger between Breitbart and the Trump campaign represents a landmark achievement for the alt-right. Are you the alt-right? And what is the alt-right?
No, I mean, I've never identified as the alt-right. The press seems determined to crown me the queen of it. All I've done is give them a fair hearing in the press. I think that white identity and white nationalism is a little misleading. I think it's more accurate to say that the alt-right cares about Western supremacy rather than white supremacy. It cares about Western values. It cares about liberal, capitalist, Western democracy, democratic values, freedom, equality, that kind of thing. And it sees, various threats to those from various fronts.
Welcome back to Reality Call's show. Today I'm interviewing Richard Spencer, which you guys have been asking me to interview him for quite a while. He is the editor of the altright.com and also has been writing about topics regarding the alt-right for about a decade now. Is that right?
Wow, I'm feeling old.
Yeah. So long before the term was even popularized, you've been talking about this kind of thing. I think your biggest claim to fame is actually the fact that you're banned from entering the UK.
Yes. Well, Theresa May has to protect the good British citizenry from terrible radicals who might, engage in terrorist acts and things like that. Yes.
She's been doing a great job of that.
Like giving speeches and,
Yeah, so Theresa May, who is now our Prime Minister in the UK, actually banned Richard Spencer from even entering the UK for fear that he might give a speech. Meanwhile, hordes of Muslim migrants are being allowed to enter the UK. So this is the nonsense that we have to deal with from our government, which is clearly very much disconnected from the people. I mean, would you say that?
Yes. It's ironic, though, when we think about it, because in a way she's trying to be connected to a people, and it's a new people that has been brought into Britain for a long time now. I actually did a video a few days ago on where I revisited Enoch Powell's speech from April 20th, 1968. At that time, obviously, Britain was a completely different place, but he definitely foresaw. He didn't foresee what we're experiencing, in the exact details. I mean, no one could, but he definitely foresaw this kind of strife, this culture war that we're engaged in. I think it's nice. I think we can say that, some governments, say in Central and Eastern Europe, they're more responsive to their people. It's a democracy in a deep sense of the word. But I think that concept has been brought into question in the United States and in Britain and in France and in Germany now even, in the sense that we have these just new peoples that have basically been brought in by leaders. And these are the peoples that they want. They're not necessarily Western. They don't have the kind of, you could say, not just self-sufficiency, but also pride that we have. They're not going to question them as much, and I think they believe that they can kind of rule over a fragmented, motley crew of a nation, and that this will actually be good for them, and that is the people that they want. So it's a very sad thing what democracy has become.
Yeah, it's very difficult for a lot of us to get our heads around how this group of people who've been for so long talking about how, they're all for women's rights and things are basically importing rapists.
Right. I mean, that's another one of just the ironies of this situation. That they are no doubt endangering women by doing this. And no, I don't want to become one of these, rebel media neoconservatives where are like, I oppose Islam because it's a threat to feminism or something. I'm not going to take that line of thought. But the fact is, it's a threat to something much more important to feminism. It's a threat to women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to say, it's horrible that they've even weaponized like women in this way by using feminism and even calling it feminism as though it's like something that is innately for women or something, when in fact it's not having any good. Well, it's not having very good impacts on women, especially tearing them away from their kind of natural role in society, and forcing them to behave like men, which they don't do very well at, and then become frustrated about, and it just creates more tension. So do you think this is all sort of a big orchestrated plan that's going on here to kind of tear apart families, or is this just happening kind of at random with this crazy leftist progressive ideas coming out of nowhere?
I mean, that is the question, and I would probably be on the side of this is not a grand conspiracy. I don't think that people got together in a smoke-filled room and thought that this is the Britain that we want, or this is the America that we want. I think in some ways it's a lot of different things, but then also one big thing. I think there are many different factions that do want this new Britain, that don't want a Britain that is for, the English and the Welsh and the Irish and the Scots and so on, but want a Britain that is for the world. And I think they want that. There are economic interests that want that. There are ideological interests that want that. There are business interests that want that, and so on. But I would say that, so there are a lot of different things that want it, but I think there's a bigger thing that wants this kind of Britain or this kind of America, and that is that we live in a kind of end of a paradigm of liberalism, and we are experiencing this playing out of liberal ideology to its end, and I don't think we should ever get away from that. I think a lot of conservatives get caught up in trying to go back a few decades. Let's return to the 1980s when we were all proud and voting for Reagan and Thatcher. Or let's return to the 1950s when, effectively 99% of the populations were Christian and their families were intact and so on. I believe that if we just go back, if we could go back, and I don't think we can, but if we could go back, it would be like rewinding a video, and you would hit play, and we would end up in the same place. So I don't think, again, going back is not possible or desirable. But we need to experience this playing out of this very big, very powerful, long-term historical trajectory. And that has been away from traditionalism. It's been towards, it's been liberalism writ large. It's towards the fragmentation of coherent nations into individuals. It's been the demoralization, delegitimization of white people as sources of authority. It's been the delegitimization of the past as a source of authority. You could say that this has been going on since 1945 and the Second World War, and that is true, but it's actually been going on a lot longer. And we are witnessing this playing out of liberalism as an historical force. And I actually believe that we're probably going to have to experience this breakdown before a new paradigm can arise. But in this breakdown, we're experiencing all sorts of contradictions. As you pointed out, that the left is pro-Muslim, also pro-feminism, pro-sex, but then if you're a young man and I don't know, you kiss a girl too hard at a party, she can accuse you of rape, but then they're I mean, it's just this ridiculous, situation where we are. And all of these contradictions, but all these contradictions are flowing out of one big historical force, and that is that we are witnessing the end of liberalism. It is a kind of end of history, but it's the end of liberalism, and it's a chaotic nightmare.
It's interesting that you say that, because I hear people such as Stefan Molyneux kind of pointing out that there are a lot of parallels with the kind of situation that America and Europe are in right now, and just kind of like pre-communist Russia. Are you scared that it might go in that direction?
Am I scared that the left there might be a kind of new left that is hard, that's willing to use violence, that's revolutionary?
Yeah, like full-on communist, death camps, that kind of thing.
Death camps, death camps for cutie, I guess. But yes, I'm not sure we're in an exact parallel, because remember the Bolshevism arose also at an end of the paradigm. It was an end of a paradigm of, you could say, late monarchy, when you had these constitutional monarchs that were still certainly based in tradition, certainly based effectively on families that won their right to rule by the sword and by birth and so on. It was the kind of end of that era, and there had been some major cataclysms, like obviously the American Revolution was one, the French Revolution was another. There's 1848 was a left-wing revolution, failed revolutions effectively. So there was some chaos in there, but it was basically a peaceful century, a highly productive century. It was the kind of liberal century in a way. And so the Bolshevism arose out of that power vacuum where there was a loss of authority of rightful rulers. I mean, we have to admit, rulers were defeated and there were abdications. I mean, that is about as dramatic as you can get in terms of sovereignty. I mean, it would be like the U.S. A U.S. president resigning his authority and a new form of government arising. It's unimaginable. But that's where the left arose. Now, the left now really is in power, and it's not a, Bolshevik, hard, crazed left. It's a different form of that left. So I don't know. Maybe it's more likely that a revolutionary right will arise, because we are more in the situation of the Bolsheviks. Ironically, remember. There is this funny story of the Prussian elite, putting Lenin into a train car and sending him into Russia. And his arrival, it was almost like he was dynamite. They were loading into a train and throwing into a country they were at war with. Maybe they'll do the same with Richard Spencer. Britain will get in some war with Iran or something, and Iran will put me on a plane and fly me into London like a stick of dynamite. I don't know.
Okay.
But we are in a very different situation. The left is in power. I'm obviously being a little bit ridiculous when I'm saying these things, but I'm just kind of pointing out a fact that the left is in power, and we are a kind of revolutionary movement that is analogous to the Bolsheviks. But in a way, the left can never be in power. I think that's one of their problems, is that they always have to imagine themselves as out of power and as fighting against, speaking truth to power and fighting against real authority. And when you look back in history, if you look at, say, the Prussian elite, they wore their power on their sleeve. They literally dressed in martial regalia. They wore, they looked like they were at war. They were, this pompousness was an expression of their family's history and their state's history and so on. And the left can't really be like that. The left always has to be these rebels who are, truly out of power. And they imagine that it's, racist from Michigan who voted for Trump are the true people who are in power. And they're speaking truth to these people who have effectively no real power whatsoever outside of voting. That's where we are. It's a very contradictory situation, but I do think that there is going to be a new right, a new kind of right, and I think it will be a paradigm shifting right. I don't know when this is going to happen. And I don't know what form it's going to happen, but I do have faith that there will be a new kind of very energetic, very radical and powerful new right that is going to rise in these Western countries, and I don't think we've really seen it yet. I don't think we've seen it in the form of Geert Wilders, or who is a kind of neoconservative. Let's be honest. I would have voted for him, but he is a kind of neocon. Or Marine Le Pen, who is, protecting the French social model. She's a kind of, reaction of 20th century France, to what's happening now. And again, I would vote for her too if I were a French citizen, but that doesn't mean that I'm not critical of her. And Donald Trump, who's a kind of, let's roll back what happened, let's go back to the 80s and we'll all be rich and things like that. It's a kind of retrograde movement. I think there's going to be something very new that is going to be a revolutionary right that's going to have to arise.
Mm-hmm. Would you actually tell us what this revolutionary right, or the alt-right, or the new right, how would you describe that for someone who's never kind of heard of this before?
Well, I've said this before. If I were to sum up the alt-right into one word, it would be identity. And so, if you ask an average conservative, how would you sum up the right in one word? I think they might say something like, well, we believe in the Constitution, we believe in free markets, or so on. I'm just curious, how would someone from the Tory party, if they were to say, give me a one sentence or even one word definition of the right?
They're so cucked at this point, I don't think it differs from the left, I'm afraid.
Right. Well, that's true for a lot of American politicians, but they would probably say something like that. We're patriotic advocates of freedom, or,
No, I don't think they even go for the freedom thing over here.
Oh, really?
It's more like,
that's too hardcore.
Lowering people's taxes or something, something really, like,
right.
Not interesting like that, yeah.
Right. I would say that if I were to sum up the alt-right, as I understand it, it would be identity. So it is an identitarian movement. We are about ourselves, and we are about every individual being a part of an extended family. And it is a collectivist movement. It is not a movement for individualism against the state or anything like that. It is a collectivist movement where we want to do what is best for us and for our community. We're attached to tradition in the way that you can't have a future if you don't have a tradition. There has to be a trajectory. There has to be a story that you're part of. And so that's the alt-right summed up.
Right. So do you think that individualism is kind of innately a leftist thing? Or, I mean, obviously we see a lot of right-wing individualists as well. How would you... The problem I get with a lot of people is that they say, look, I'm an individualist, I am the opposite of a communist, and if you say anything different, you're verging on communist. So what's the difference between communism and kind of identitarian politics?
Right. No, I think you're getting at something. I would say that there has to be a tension. And yes, I mean, look, I'm an individualist in so many ways. I've actually experienced loneliness in a way that many people haven't. That many people have not, because I've experienced being a social outcast, you could say, of having the communities in which I live literally protest my existence. That's a little bit where, I mean, what Millennial Woes, what he just felt. I mean, again, I've been through this so many times that I'm kind of like, I have this hardened shell around me that it's hard to get me down. But, Millennial Woes had never experienced that before. And he experienced having his name on the front page of the paper, being ridiculed and demeaned on his paper, people just coming to his home, invading his privacy. I mean, I totally have total sympathy for the fact that he was, and he's open about this, he was depressed and scared and bewildered. I mean, totally a natural reaction. But anyway, to get back to what I was saying before, yeah, individuality needs to exist in a tension with the collective. And I know some people always think that I'm always like punting on issues, because I I don't be like, I'm for, it's either or, individuality or collectivism.
Yeah.
No, that's not how I think. I don't think like that either or type thinking. I think that individualism is truthful and is meaningful in the sense that it's in attention with the collective. So yes, I'm an individual. I have my own opinions. I have my own life to lead. I'm eccentric in certain ways, but I'm part of the community in which I reside, and I'm part of a bigger community that's my race. And so I think that's a healthy tension. If we go either to one end, I think we get into bad things. So if we're a collectivist to the point that everyone earns the same amount for their labor, everyone is just basically one cog working in the same big factory, that is horrifying. That is Bolshevism gone mad. That is a horrible form of collectivism. At the same time, if we adopt the individualism of capitalism and the individualism of many conservatives, you are just basically a consumer. You are selling your labor in the market, and you are buying things with it in a global or a national or global market. Mm-hmm. And that also is a very bad thing. Even the conservatives, when they talk about family values, they often mean that very strictly in the sense of basically a family unit that is. And Margaret Thatcher said this, there is no society, there are only individuals and families. I know that can be taken out of context a little bit, but I do think she is wrong in that sentiment. And it's wrong to just embrace ourselves as part of a family unit that we live in a house in the burbs and so on. That family doesn't make sense if it's not part of a bigger family. And that's, your nation or your region, you could say, but also just a bigger part of the, our racial family. So I think we need to get out of this either or thinking that, we support the individual. No, I mean, it's both thinking. And I'm not being wishy-washy. I'm not contradicting myself. That's how we should think, that there are tensions, and that's what a great society is. There's always going to be a tension between, say, tradition and innovation or revolution, or even revolution is an ironical word. It has two meanings. You could think of it as revolutionary chaos or innovation, wild innovation, or you could think of it in a cyclical sense, literally a cyclical sense of a revolving, of going back and returning and going forward and going back and so on. So I think that is how I have a dynamic view of the world and society. And there has to be those tensions for society to be really productive. As conservatives, we don't want to live like the Taliban in Afghanistan, where we want to kind of like, or the Amish in the United States, where effectively, the Amish basically froze a moment in time. I don't know quite when it was. It was like 1840 or something. Who knows? But we want to just freeze this moment and say, okay, let's keep, this is our rule, keep this, for all time. No, that's a kind of bad conservatism. We want to have a tension at the heart of everything we do.
So please tell me how you developed your worldview. Did you have it while you were growing up, or was there a particular point in your life that you suddenly changed, or was it a gradual thing?
Well, I mean, I've said this before. I think in some ways, like, I was born this way. I certainly, my political opinions will evolve. I'll say things that I wouldn't have agreed with, 5 years ago now. And I don't think that's a matter of being a wishy-washy or going. I think it's just a matter of evolving. I can see something from a new perspective. But I do also think that there is a general continuity to my entire life. So I have always been like this, and I've used this phrase for conferences and some books and things like that. But it's become who we are. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a very, I guess, Spencerian theme of a seeming contradiction that's truly a tension. So becoming means evolution, it means progress, it means going forward, but who we are is stasis. So we're going to become ourselves. And I think that's how I see my own life. In terms of just basic, moments, epiphanies, I would say that my really serious study of Nietzsche changed my intellectual trajectory, or maybe the way I would say it is I wouldn't articulate who I am if it weren't for my encounter with Nietzsche when I was around 20. So it was a little while ago now. But he was a kind of shattering moment where I resonated with him, and reading him. I read the Genealogy of Morals. That's probably a good place to start if any of your listeners have never read Nietzsche. I think that's a good place to start. But it was a kind of shattering experience because I resonated with him, and I loved it. But at the same time, I did feel like my so many of my conceptions and ideals were just shattering, in the face of this reading. So I would say that Nietzsche probably did more than anything to influence my worldview and the way I think about politics. Even though Nietzsche's not a political thinker, at least on the surface, he is a deeply important political thinker. Also, a little bit later, about 10 years after I encountered Nietzsche, I encountered Carl Schmitt. And I would say that he has inflected how I talk about politics and the state and government, probably more than anyone. I mean, he is, I would say, easily the greatest legal mind and political mind of the 20th century. And he's someone who really has something to say, to us now. So I would say those two figures are probably most important.
So you haven't mentioned race realism or the acknowledgement of differences between races that make them somewhat incompatible when it comes to living together. Is that something that you view as not so important in informing your worldview, like a secondary thing?
I do think it's a secondary thing, and that doesn't mean that it's not. That doesn't mean that it's not deeply important, but I was definitely influenced by Jared Taylor, and I think when I first encountered Jared Taylor, it was probably like 2003, 2004. I actually subscribed to his newsletter. When I was at Duke graduate school, I was getting the American Renaissance newsletter. I hope no one saw that, or maybe if they saw it, they would have no idea what it was. But that definitely influenced me, and that changed how I think about race and so on. And Jared was someone who would talk rationally about race, and I definitely appreciated that. Because there's so much, there's leftist talk about race in this way that's totally unattractive to most of us, and oftentimes, sometimes people do fit the stereotype. There are people who, I hate the niggers kind of guys. That's not really gonna inspire people like you and me. So Jared is a very rational force, but I wouldn't say that Jared inflected my worldview at all. It was a kind of, I think race is the hot button of our time. I mean, it is the big one. If you talk about that, you are just considered out of bounds. We can't go there, and that's revealing in itself. But I do think it's kind of symptomatic of something else. I don't think that if we simply got rid of affirmative action programs, which might have a different name in Britain. What are they called in Britain? Positive discrimination or something?
Equal opportunities.
Equal opportunity, yeah. If we got rid of those, or if we shut down all immigration, I still think we'd be actually in the same boat. I think we would still be in this nihilistic spiral. So I would say that race is a kind of secondary issue. It's not, and it has to flow from something else. I don't think we should be. I don't think we should ever be a movement where we only discuss IQ charts or our 23andMe account. I think we need to be something different, and I think identitarianism, identitarians which is a European movement that I've certainly adopted the name and adopted many of their ideas. I mean it doesn't start in the scientific reality of race. I mean the scientific reality of race is a kind of it's a secondary, maybe even a tertiary aspect.
For me, actually, it was what caused me to kind of wake up to this and become politically interested. Before, I was like apolitical. But realizing that the idea that everyone's equal, everyone's going to be compatible with each other, everyone's going to behave in the same way, realizing that that was a complete lie is what caused me to realize how important it is actually to be ethno-nationalist, which means encouraging the preservation of diverse ethnic groups rather than trying to mix them all up and calling it diversity.
That's good. I certainly think a lot of people have waken up just due to the scientific reality of race, and then they've started to learn about other things. That wasn't quite my trajectory, and I also think, again, I think that the alt-right or identitarianism, that we definitely need to talk about that. It's a very important thing, but I think our movement has to be more organic than that. It shouldn't just be a movement about racial differences. I think it has to be a movement about, us and who we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly think that a lot of white men across Europe and America are being taught, throughout school that they're like the most evil people on earth, literally. So I think that they would like to hear another narrative, so they're probably open to listening to
Or
it.
maybe we should tell them, you are the most evil. It's kind of it is true. There's a little bit of irony there too, because I remember when I was in graduate school it was 2006 or something, and there were a few. I was actually in the history department, even though I was studying intellectual history. So I was studying the history of philosophy, you can say, but there were a few required courses, and they were not courses on history as fact or chronology or narrative even. They were the required courses I think there were 3 of them, and they were basically ideology. So they wanted to get you in the right mindset. So you studied, feminism, post-structuralism, Marxism, post-Marxism, Foucault, all the whole kit and caboodle. And I remember there's this anecdote that's always stuck with me. We were in class, and someone made some observation about pop music in South America. And I can't remember quite what the observation was, but I remember when this person, it was a girl who said it, I was like, oh, yeah, I think you're right there. That's an interesting generalization you just made. And there was this girl who was studying she was studying South America, and she was like physically revolted by the whole thing. She's like, you can't make generalizations about another race that, it was a white person, she was generalizing while white, which is, illegal in academia. And she was like, you can't talk about this music unless you understand the history of slavery, of oppression, of racial domination throughout South America. And I was just thinking, like, in this funny, obviously this girl was ridiculous, but in this funny way, she was the ultimate white supremacist. She was basically saying that these people are objects unless, you cannot understand them without whites, without these titans that walked the earth and determined the future. So there is a I don't know, there's a little bit of an irony in this leftist obsession with whites as all powerful, because I do think we're all powerful. I don't think we're just some ethnic group that, we have, much tradition and antique folk music and stuff. We do, but I don't think that's really who we are. We are a Faustian, you could say Promethean race. We are world history. We do change the world in ways that other races just simply don't. And I think that actually is a key aspect of ourselves. We aren't Native Americans, and or Indians. I don't really have any, I don't begrudge Indians for holding on to their traditions, but we aren't them. There's some spark of a kind of an animism, a sense of destiny and desire to rule and change the world that really does speak to us. We are the people of Rome. We're the people of the British Empire. We are the people of great invention, of challenging everything, challenging the way of the world and trying to change it. So I don't think we should ever get away from that that you could say the revolutionary spirit of the white race. Usually oftentimes people in our movement will always accuse Jews of this. Jews are revolution. Well, that is obviously there's a lot of truth to that, but there is a kind of Faustian soul within the white race, and I don't think we should run away from that. I think we should embrace it.
Yeah, it's a good point you made about how if white people sneeze in the wrong direction, we're accused of oppressing people. If we are that prone to oppressing people without even hardly trying, then what does it really say about those people? And I mean, it sounds like the people who say those kind of things must be the white supremacists, right?
Right. I mean, one funny argument you can make towards leftists is we need to shut off all immigration because we cannot bring these poor people from the third world into white supremacy where they will be oppressed. We need to stop immigration now. I mean, it's a kind of funny thing to say, but it will make them think a little bit because exactly we need to rescue them from white oppression and keep them from entering Great Britain or something. I don't know. Obviously, it's it's a cheeky thing to do, but it does actually. The reason why it's funny and the reason why it makes people have a double take is because it's getting at something.
Yes, because
about
obviously
themselves and about the world.
The narrative just breaks down the second you question it, but it's been drummed into our heads over and over and over again. So and everyone else around you believes it. The TV confirms it. So your professor agrees with it. So it must be true. And it's It's kind of peer pressure.
Even the liberals and the left are kind of Faustian in their way because they want to overcome themselves like that. We have to let them in because we need to be better people. And I think Merkel, and she might even in a way be explicit about this, but she has a Protestant guilt complex. That there is this terrible guilt that I bear and that all Germans bear, and that is Adolf Hitler. And we must purge this guilt in this transcendent process of allowing in Syrian refugees. And again, that is how she thinks. And in a way, getting at that weird mindset of these liberals is more revealing than just to look at, say, economic motivations or something. They have psychological and philosophical and moral motivations for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So do you think they actually have a long-term plan of what they're doing, or are they just kind of piece by piece, yes, we must be more progressive, progress?
I think it's the latter. I wouldn't totally put out of bounds the idea that there are some people with a major decades-long agenda and a kind of revenge agenda. They want to destroy the white race and so on. I think that there's some truth to that, but I at least what I would focus on is this moral drive within ourselves to overcome ourselves and effectively destroy ourselves. I think that is what motivates someone like Merkel and countless other Germans who agree with Merkel. Mm-hmm. Even conservatives.
And how would you go about attempting to change that perspective?
I think we need to bring a new moral perspective to them, and I don't think it's a matter that they lack information. That we could be well, don't Syrians have an average IQ of 90, and therefore they're going to be more prone to unemployment. I don't think that's going to affect them. Because that's not what motivated them. They don't want to bring in Syrian refugees because they think they're intelligent. I mean, they want to bring them in because of this moral, debt burden that they want to unburden themselves of. And so I think we have to speak morally. I mean, we have to speak of the moral rightness of the survival of peoples within the white race, but really as the white race as a whole. And we need to think of that as a kind of moral crusade, and I do think I joked a little bit when you said all these people have been taught that they're evil, and I don't know. I mean, I don't I think we should also, I don't, I think we should also, in a way, embrace that so-called evilness to us in the sense of, we did conquer most of the world. We did explore the world. We do dominate. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to go to an Indian, American Indian. They use the term Native American, which I don't really like, but I'll call them what they want to be called, to be honest. I'm not sure I want to go up to a Native American tribe and wave in their face some notion that we won or something. We destroy. I mean, that's obviously in bad taste. But at the same time, like I do think that we shouldn't be afraid of embracing that conquering spirit. I mean, we did dominate this continent that I'm in right now, North America. We did change the world. We are badass. And I don't think we should ever get away from that. I don't know. I don't want a white race that's just a bunch of silly little people, going to work and watching Netflix in their suburban homes. That's boring. I mean, we should be a master race, a people that dominates, that changes the world. That's who we are. I think we might need to be a little bit evil.
Okay, what is a master race exactly?
A master race, in this sense, is I would say, like, look towards a group of people like the Romans who were able to integrate so much of the world, certainly integrate Europe, and for centuries, for millennia, to not only chart their own destiny, but to actually bring other people into that story, that greater story. That is a people that conquers and dominates.
I mean, is that what you want to see us doing in the future?
We're in a very different situation than the Roman Republic was in. I mean, I don't think we're going to need to conquer the Gauls or conquer the Britons or anything like that. But and I don't think that I would definitely not support dominating the Han Chinese or something. I think that is probably impossible and certainly undesirable. But I do think we need to think of ourselves as such a people. I do think that we need to integrate our entire race, and I think that we should have this kind of wild vision of the future that would include space travel, that would include becoming greater human beings that we are today. So I do think we need to call upon that spirit within us. I don't think we're going to ever be a people that is just a bunch of, again, just a bunch of goody people who don't shake up the apple cart and stick to themselves and stay at home. That's not who we are. Much like we need,
unfortunately.
It has. Very sad. It's very sad. I think we need to call upon that spirit. But I do think I certainly don't I don't think it's possible or desirable to have like a white planet or something like that. I think we're going to have to deal with other people's rationally and diplomatically and respect their own desires and their own identities. But one of the reasons why I am in this, it's not just to cut off immigration. It's not just to protect my people, but it's that, why are we not exploring the universe right now? Why have we not? There was so much you have a few decades separate the invention of flight and the sending a man into outer space, sending dogs into outer space, then men, and then a man on the moon. We did that within a half century, and yet after 1969, we have not done something that's inspired the human soul like the NASA program has. That has we've done some wonderful things, and I definitely support scientific research and various probes or something, but we've never done something that has inspired the soul of the world. And I think that one of the fundamental reasons why we've done that is we've pursued this false god of equality and democracy. And we need to give up that. We need to give up that false god, but we're going to need, channel all those billions and trillions of dollars and pounds in towards a grand vision of exploring the universe.
What's your spiritual worldview?
Well, I was raised as an Episcopalian, which means that we never took Christianity particularly seriously. My family, if I look back at my family, they are Protestants, but they were not particularly religious people. They supported Christianity as a kind of, maybe at worst as a country club, but also as a kind of culturally significant community building, institution. There's no one in my family who's particularly attracted to Bible thumping or personal relationships with Jesus or things like that. I would say tragically, I am an atheist. I do get criticized often for, oh, he's attacking Christianity again. I'm really not. And I also do believe that these churches are some of the last bastions of white community building that we have. For better and for worse, they are. And so I don't think that we should be, new atheist or Dawkins thumping atheist or anything like that. But I also would be lying if I told you that I were a true Christian. That's again who I am. I also probably do have critical views of Christianity in the sense that this Jesus movement is a kind of, structurally speaking, it is liberalism. It is an individualism within a universal whole. And I think there's a part of that has spoken to the Western soul. But I don't know who we're going to be going forward. I do think that if you look at most all institutions, with the exception of Orthodox Christianity, they are obviously pro-Christian, but they are really radically anti-white, even to the point of being anti-Western. And I don't think we can look towards the Catholic Church or any Protestant church really as a source of spiritual warmth, of spiritual inspiration. I think it's quite the opposite, to be honest. And that doesn't mean that these churches don't serve wonderful functions as community building. But that's where I am. We're in a very strange place right now, because there's actually a very good book that I'm reading by a person named Kaufman. It's called, Will the Fundamentalists Inherit the Earth? And Will the Religious Inherit the Earth? And it's saying something very true, and that is that we're in a tricky situation where the birth rates are leveling out across the world. They're leveling out even in the Muslim world. And that will often come with just some very simple facts: greater technology, Western values, materialism, and so on. Women, first off, we need to have fewer babies just simply because of infant mortality is far, far lower than it was a century ago, 2 centuries ago. But also as we enter the modern world, we start to want to pursue a career, to buy things, and we're not focused specifically on reproducing our family and reproducing the race. So there is a general leveling off. However, there is a very steep decline in leveling off among secular people. So people who don't have that religious instinct are having fewer babies. The fact is, a nation is the sum of its people. I mean, if there are going to be more religious-minded people, then the nation is going to become more religious, and religiosity is heritable. So it is what it is. At the same time, Christianity is going into clearly a steep decline in terms of legitimacy, in terms of belief. The fact is, in 1950, the amount of outright atheists, I'm not sure that would even be 1% of the population of Britain and the United States. Well, I've seen some views of it being close to 9%. And then if you actually look at people who aren't attending services on a weekly basis, it goes up to, I've seen things like 40% and things like that, or effectively non-religious. So at the same time, we've had a loss of legitimacy of the churches. We've had a lot, white American Christianity, which is effectively Protestant Christianity, is declining in legitimacy and potency. So we are in a Catholics, ex-Catholic. I've heard this statistics is actually interesting. There's a book by a man named Robert. What is his name? Robert Jones, called the End of White Christian America, that I read a couple months ago. It's worth reading. But yes, if ex-Catholics were a denomination, it would be the largest denomination in the country. That's a little bit scary for the Catholic Church, or for the white Catholic Church. So we're in this strange situation where there are different factors pushing in different directions. Christianity is losing legitimacy at the same time. Secular people are having fewer babies. Fundamentalists are having more babies. There's a general trend towards leveling off of the population. A lot of countervailing forces. I don't know where the white race is going to be spiritually 100 years from now. But I don't think it's going to be where we are now. We might be Muslims. We might, who knows? We might be evangelical Christians or Orthodox or something. Or we might be pagans. I don't know. But we're in a very contradictory situation right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a very strange situation.
How would you describe yourself spiritually?
Well, I'm agnostic, but I also have so I am agnostic in the true sense of the word, of not having the knowledge, to acknowledge any particular God. But at the same time, I don't have a typical atheist worldview because I don't believe in materialist science. I have a different perspective, which a lot of atheists get very angry at me for talking about, which is that I think that mind and matter can interact with each other. So that's the kind of thing that gets atheists ranting in my comments.
Well, mind is matter. I mean, that the thing is, even saying mind and matter can interact with each other, you're assuming a dualism of a mind and body distinction, which I don't think we should assume.
That's just kind of
what is consciousness?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We don't even know what consciousness is, really, except for the materialist science worldview is that it's just an illusion that kind of happens in your brain. This is the kind of Sam Harris, typical neuroscientist explanation. I suspect that that's not correct.
Sure.
So I have a slightly different worldview that doesn't really fit anywhere. I don't have a name for myself. It'll probably be different
That's
in
good.
a year. So
that's fine.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you said that you were kind of isolated. Do your family at all support your views? How have your family responded to you being one of the most, I don't want to say hated, but kind of you're the face of evil according to mainstream media right now. So how do your family take it? Right.
Well, not terribly well. I mean, I think I am not one of these people who was, I adopted my views specifically because of my father believed this or my mother believed it. It's not the case. My parents are pretty mainstream Republicans, I would say. So they're kind of vaguely on the right, but they're certainly not alt-right. And so, yes, I think they probably wish that I were doing something else. I in terms of my wife and so on, I think she probably wishes I were doing something else at some point. But she also has a deeper sympathy as well. So it is hard. Again, I said we're a collectivist, but in some ways you do have to be a rabid individualist to do this, because you are going to get pushed back by your own family, and it hurts. It's hard.
Yeah, that's very true. And actually, that reminds me, I've had some people say, you know, this makes sense from a kind of intellectual perspective, but I actually don't feel any particular kinship with my race. I mean, what do you say to those people?
Well, I agree. Many times white people bother me more than anyone else. Uh, Sam Dixon has joked that he wishes that he could be a transracial, that it would be so much more easier to be black, and it's like, yeah, I support my people. It's so everyone accepts it. It's natural. Yeah, no, I do feel that. I mean, I think the paradigmatic case of that was what I experienced in Whitefish recently, but also in 2014, where the whole town was. I spend more of my time in Alexandria right now, and I'm experiencing the exact same thing. Basically, the whole town, and mostly white people, will gang up against you. So in Whitefish, there were these town meetings where everyone was denouncing me for various reasons. Some of them had something to do with stuff I've said. Some of them had nothing to do with what I've ever said or thought. And that was actually led by rabbis, but I would not. It was led by this group called Love Lives Here, which is the leaders are literally not just Jews, but literally rabbis. But I actually wouldn't blame this all on the Jews. There were white people who were just as passionate about hating me, hating the witch, as any Jew. There are very few Jews in Montana. The exact same thing is happening in Alexandria. I was actually walking down the street to the tailor in Alexandria, and I passed by there these two cronish women who were definitely Gentile Christians. They were actually, the Episcopalian Church in my neighborhood really hates me, and they were sitting there, and I was standing waiting for the light to change, and they were standing by. They're holding a sign that said "honk if you honk if you think Richard Spencer is evil" or something. And I was funny because I was just standing there, kind of looking at them like, "Oh, hi, good day." They didn't recognize me. It's quite funny, but yeah.
Oh dear. Yeah.
But yeah, it is difficult when the white race attacks you, but Episcopalians attack you. My own high school, which is an Episcopalian prep school, has denounced me. So it's this kind of funny situation where the WASP elite have turned on one of their own. It's a weird situation, but all I can do is laugh about it, because I have to move forward. And if people don't hate you a little bit, you're not doing anything that matters. I mean, that's something that I definitely believe. I mean, if I were doing some kind of vague civic initiative, we should have more local parks or something. Well, you're probably not, and I would support such an initiative, but you're not offending anyone. The left likes you, conservatives like you, whatever. Who cares? But if you're doing something that really matters, people will hate you. And if you're doing something too eccentric, people will live with you. If I were the Flat Earth Society or something, people would be like, well, he's a real oddball, but to each his own kind of thing. But instead, people feel like they have to protest me, that they have to define themselves against me. And I think that ultimately is good. That ultimately means that we're doing something that truly matters.
Okay, and what do you see the best case looking like for the USA in the future versus what do you see the worst case looking like?
Well, the worst case is easy. I think it would be a militant form of what we've experienced. So it would be, direct dispossession of white people, taking their wealth, taking their homes, really rabid anti-white sentiment that today is becoming more explicit, as you know, but is kind of soft. It's these dear white people, let me tell you how y'all can improve yourself, that kind of attitude. But it's not like we should go kill white people or something. So obviously, I think that would be the worst case scenario, where we are treated like kulaks, or we are treated like white Frenchmen in Haiti, or so on. That's clearly the worst situation. Whether that will happen remains to be seen. It probably won't happen in my lifetime, but it might. We shouldn't totally discount such a scenario. particularly in the United States, where the demographics are really much, much worse than they are in any European country, although you all are catching up. I think the most likely scenario is that white people will have a kind of intensification of what we have now. So white people will become effectively a large minority of, say, 40% of the population, but one that is hated. So even when we're 40% of the population, we're going to hear all these stories about Jim Crow and slavery and the Holocaust and so on and so on. We're always going to be burdened with this guilt, even when we have lost power. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. And I would say, in terms of a good scenario that I can't really describe, that would be that there is a true breakdown, a paradigmatic breakdown, and that there is an opportunity for a new order. And again, this isn't wild speculation. This is, look at history. This is what happens. And I don't think we should actually work too hard to describe exactly what we're going to do. I don't think we should say, oh, we want to build a new fortress in the Pacific Northwest, or we want to, I don't know, take back Texas. I don't think we should talk in these explicit terms, because we're not there yet, and we might not be there for 100 years. And so I think what we should, and it's an event horizon. I mean, I don't know. I do know that something's going to collapse, but I don't know what way it will collapse. Yeah. And so we basically need to wait, and we need to look at opportunities that seem to be pointing in our direction. You know, the Trump phenomenon. I mean, look, the guy's kind of ridiculous, I'll be honest, but it's been a really positive phenomenon. It has been a white ingathering and so on. And I think we should definitely be supportive and see the potential in it, and criticize him when criticize him for the right reasons, and not just be these, romantics who are, like, oh, politics is tainted, I don't want to ever take part in it. I think we should definitely, be engaged in it, but we shouldn't lose our souls to it either. I don't think we should, I think there is this tendency where people thought that we won after Brexit, or we won after Trump, and we didn't win anything, actually. We won nothing. And so I think we need to have a little bit of distance from these things as well. So I don't know what a new, rejuvenated white society or British society or Czech or German society. I don't know what that will look like. I have my own vision, but I think it's very important to kind of keep that vision a little bit dreamy, to be honest. I think we should say, we want to become who we are. We want to revive the greatness that we're capable of. I don't think we should say, a week from next Tuesday we are going to, it just we'll look like fools, because we're not in that breakdown scenario just yet, and we might not be for a long time. I do think that where we are is going to break down, but when and how it just can't be answered. And so I think we just need to focus on consciousness and just allow history to unfold. And yeah, that's basically my position.
Right, yeah. And also doing a lot of what Jared Taylor's been doing for the past 20 years, I think it is, where he's been really laying the foundation for race realism, which is obviously helpful for waking up some people to, the misinformation that we've been brainwashed with. So in a way, we can lay the foundation for accepting that, the reality of tribalism, which is what ethno-nationalism is all about, really, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for this interview.
Thank you.
Please let people know where to find more of your content. We've got altright.com.
I would just go to altright.com. That's actually where I'm putting all of my energy. And there's also rateexternal.com. That's another good place. But alt-right is really where I think the future is for me, and I think it's the future for our movement too. So I would just check